Dusk settled early over Boston, and the city wore a coat of white as gentle snowflakes drifted past the glass windows of the tall office building. Julia Warren stood quietly, watching the streets below. "Miss Warren, your final report is ready." The nervous voice belonged to a new hire named Ethan, still eager to please. Julia managed a polite, practiced smile. "Thank you, Ethan. I'll look it over before tomorrow's presentation." The city looked both familiar and distant after years spent building a life elsewhere. As a financial analyst, Julia had a gift for unraveling stories hidden in spreadsheets. The screen flashed the word mom, and she hesitated before answering. "Hi, Mom." It was more than a job. It was her refuge from the messy parts of life. Where Julia was called the serious, responsible one, Sabrina was the golden child, the kind who got all the affection and second chances. Sabrina loved parties and always found her way into the center of attention. Julia, meanwhile, had spent her life being told she was too boring, too focused, too much of a workaholic. Since she'd moved to Chicago and started her career, that distance had only deepened, both emotionally and physically. Her mother Linda's voice was chipper, like nothing had changed since Julia was a teenager. The engagement had come suddenly. She'd met Daniel Carter a year earlier while consulting for his family's business, Carter and Sons Furniture. Daniel was fascinated by her. What started as professional respect became friendship, and then, quietly, it blossomed into something deeper. He saw in Julia a kindness and brilliance that few ever bothered to notice. She tried to shut out her family's voices and focus on the presentation waiting for her attention. Talking to him was the only time she felt truly herself in Boston. Her mother's eyes sparkled in a way Julia didn't like. "Well, Julie, you finally landed a big fish." She wanted elegance, not extravagance. When she met her mother and Sabrina for dinner, the old tension rose again. She knew they'd never understand that Daniel meant more to her than any family fortune. "Shouldn't you go bigger? You're marrying into the Carter family." "Mom, I love Daniel." "That's what matters, not the money." "Are you joining management at Carter and Sons?" she prodded, twirling her wine. "You're not planning to live in Chicago after you're married, are you?" "What's the point of marriage then?" "You're late," Linda said, kissing her cheek. "Have you chosen your dress?" "You're the reason we're here." Daniel saw her in a way her own family never could. "There's something I want to do for you at the ceremony. A surprise. But you'll have to wait. But I want your family and everyone else to see who you really are. I'm so grateful we get to build something together. Not the person they've always decided you should be." The company had been teetering on the edge of collapse after a brutal recession. "Look at this, Julia, you were right." Even if her family never saw her, Daniel did, and maybe that was enough. "We can save the family business without losing what makes it special." "How much is his family really worth, Julie?" "Congrats, sis. They'll never understand," she said softly. All that sensible investing finally paid off. Her mother and sister kept asking probing questions. Linda repeatedly asked, her mother only smiled. "You'll follow his wishes, Julie. That's what a real wife does. Do you really love Daniel?" As though waiting for Julia to trip and reveal her true motives. Julia had poured her heart into finding ways to keep the company alive, not just as numbers on a screen, but as a living history, full of real people and decades of sweat and sacrifice. "I made dinner reservations with Sabrina. We want to actually see you, not just your LinkedIn updates." She had come back to Boston only for a short assignment, carrying the weight of her success in Chicago with her, but old memories felt heavier with every breath. "I'm sorry, Mom." The discomfort she felt every time she returned to Boston wasn't just about the city itself. It was the gulf between her and her family, a chasm that had grown wider over the years. "It's always work, work, work. Don't you know how much your sister misses you?" "I can't tonight. I have a major presentation in the morning." A soft knock at her office door brought Julia back. Her voice carried years of resilience and the kind of poise that comes from fighting for every inch in her field. "What about tomorrow evening?" "I can meet you after my meeting." That night, on the way home to her luxury apartment, Julia's phone rang. "Julie, where are you?" Julia stifled a sigh. A familiar disappointment crept into Linda's words. Closing her eyes, Julia tried to quiet the ache. When she hung up, Julia turned her face to the window of the taxi, watching her own reflection flicker in the glass. Her sister Sabrina had always been the light in their mother's life. Julia's apartment was cold and spotless. The only evidence of real joy was the diamond ring glittering on her finger. Where most consultants would have suggested layoffs and selling assets, Julia found ways to innovate without gutting the soul of the company. The day she told her family about the engagement, Julia had hoped naively, perhaps for some happiness from them. Instead, she got sarcasm and suspicion. "Daniel Carter from the furniture company?" Sabrina smirked. The words stung, but Julia let them pass. With wedding plans slowly gathering pace, Julia felt increasingly out of place. Standing by her apartment window, Julia pressed her forehead against the cold glass, watching the city lights twinkle through the snow. Her phone buzzed with a message from Daniel, and for a moment Julia's anxiety melted. Later, at the bridal shop, Julia smiled at the wedding planner's proposal: white roses, baby's breath, nothing too flashy. Linda was already seated, Sabrina beside her, whispering about something until Julia arrived. Julia nodded, explaining, "It's simple but beautiful." Sabrina wrinkled her nose. Julia shrugged. "Daniel likes it, that's all that matters." Her mother leaned in, her voice just loud enough for the nearby tables. Julia felt heat rise in her cheeks. But Linda and Sabrina exchanged a knowing look, as if Julia had just confirmed their worst suspicions. For the rest of dinner, Sabrina asked about Julia's future. Julia tried to explain that she and Daniel were still figuring things out. He was attached to Boston, and she wasn't ready to give up her hard-won career. Julia left dinner with her heart in knots, wondering why the people who should have loved her most only seemed to doubt her intentions. At Daniel's office a few days later, he spread blueprints and financial reports on the desk, his eyes shining with excitement. Daniel reached for her hand. Julia's worries faded in the warmth of his touch. As they planned the wedding, Daniel's face took on a secretive look. Julia smiled despite herself. "Can I have a hint? If I told you, it wouldn't be a surprise." Her heart squeezed at those words. Daniel's hand squeezed hers. "You deserve to be known for the person you are, Julia." His words lingered as she walked home that night through the falling snow, feeling both hopeful and afraid. Julia resolved to face whatever tomorrow brought. The evening before Julia's crucial presentation felt tense and restless. She worked late into the night, cross-checking every figure in the report, searching for any possible mistake. Outside, the city's skyline blurred under soft snowfall. But her mind kept drifting to the uneasy dinner with her mother and sister. She glanced at the screen, seeing Daniel's name. Relief washed through her. For a moment, the tension slipped away. She stared at the engagement ring on her finger, remembering how Daniel had proposed in the quietest, most sincere way. No grand gesture, just a promise that he saw her for who she truly was. His voice was gentle, concerned. When she finished, her colleagues offered rare applause. As she gathered her notes, Ethan stopped her in the hall. "That was amazing, Miss Warren." Maybe she thought, "I do belong here." "You made it sound so simple. I have never seen the team so engaged." The restaurant glowed with candlelight, but the air was heavy. Linda and Sabrina were already there, whispering again as Julia approached. I know Daniel's family has money, but don't you want to enjoy life for once? You're getting married, not merging companies." She sat down quietly, trying to avoid the tension that always seemed to follow them. "How are you holding up?" "Well, just don't make any rash decisions. A marriage isn't a business deal." "So Julia, big day. You must be exhausted from all that." "What is it?" "Asset management. I have a surprise for you today." "I know things are hard, but I promise it'll be worth it." Even as she double-checked her slides, their skeptical faces and dismissive words echoed in her head, undermining her confidence. At work, she felt competent and respected, but at home, she was back to being the one who never measured up. His respect made her feel capable, valued, and loved in a way she'd never known with her own family. Sabrina sent message after message, suggesting more expensive dresses, fancier venues, making sly comments about living up to the Carter family standards. Daniel watched her, hope shining in his eyes. "It's all because of you. You showed me how to see the company differently. I couldn't have done this without you. I can't tell you yet, but it's for you. For everyone to see who you really are. I want you to look at something," he said. "I'm just glad I could help, Daniel. Your trust means everything to me." He handed her a draft of a new business plan, full of notes in his careful handwriting. Would her family ever see her for who she was, or would she always be the outsider, forever struggling to earn their love? Linda questioned every decision, always circling back to whether Julia was really happy. Financial consulting, Mom. She was ready to stand up for herself, no matter what her family might say. She wanted to scream that love had nothing to do with Daniel's family name or their wealth, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she finished her meal in silence, wishing she could disappear. I could never work as hard as you. You'd hate my job. The wedding was fast approaching, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something big, something life-changing was waiting for her just ahead. She had always been the strong one, but some wounds cut deeper than ambition or logic could fix. All she'd ever wanted was her mother's approval, her sister's support. Instead, she felt more alone than ever. And yes, it was important. Every time Julia returned to Boston, the city felt colder, not because of the weather, but because of the family memories that trailed her like shadows. No matter what they say, you're incredible. I see it and I'm proud of you. You have nothing to prove to anyone. Do you really love Daniel, Julie? Or is this just about security? She remembered the childhood weekends when she'd build block towers, lining them up neatly while Sabrina danced and twirled for their mother's praise. It had always been like that, Sabrina shining, Julia working, neither one able to step into the other's light. Julia's phone chimed. Julia let her guard down. I'm nervous about tomorrow, but more than that, I wish my family could be happy for us. Daniel's tone was soothing. The conference room buzzed with anticipation. Her boss, Mr. Chang, nodded at her as she set up her presentation. Julia forced herself to focus on the numbers, blocking out everything else. They talked for a long time. Daniel's warmth grounded her in a way she had never experienced before, and Julia found herself smiling as they said goodnight. The next day, Julia arrived early at the office, nerves tight in her chest. She spoke with a clarity and confidence that silenced the room. Julia smiled, her spirits lifting. That evening, she met her family for dinner as promised. Linda poured wine with a practiced flick of her wrist. Julia forced a laugh. Sabrina leaned forward, her voice bright and cutting. You're always busy, aren't you? Julia felt herself stiffen. She tried to change the subject, asking about Sabrina's work, but her sister just waved her hand. The conversation spiraled, as it always did, until Linda interrupted, fixing Julia with a probing gaze. Julia's jaw tightened. I love him more than anything. Linda's lips pursed, as if she'd expected another answer. Julia felt the sting of those words. Back at her apartment, Julia let herself cry quietly. The next morning, Daniel called with a gentle voice. Julia was grateful for his steadiness. As the days passed, wedding plans accelerated. Julia started to dread each interaction with her family. But Daniel was a constant anchor. He encouraged her ideas for Carter and Sons furniture, even suggesting they modernize their designs with eco-friendly materials, just as Julia had proposed. One afternoon, Daniel asked Julia to come by his office. Julia read through it, realizing just how much of her advice he'd followed. Julia blinked away sudden tears. He smiled, his expression tender and mysterious. There's one thing about the wedding. Julia's curiosity burned, but she let it go, trusting him. She felt a strange sense of anticipation and dread. That night, as she drifted off to sleep, Julia realized she was no longer the timid girl who always tried to please everyone. But in the back of her mind, old fears lingered. As the weeks rolled on, wedding preparations became both a distraction and a battleground. Julia met with florists, chose a band, and tried on dresses, but every milestone seemed tainted by her family's doubts. Are you sure about the menu? Daniel's family has certain standards, you know. Have you thought about inviting more of our old friends from the club? Each question sounded harmless on the surface, but Julia could feel the judgment behind them. Sabrina, this wedding isn't about impressing anyone. It's about me and Daniel. Daniel's respect was steady and unconditional. He never saw her as just a consultant or a fiancé. Sometimes Daniel would take her hand, his eyes searching hers. Do you know how proud I am of you, Julia? He would say. You've given us all a second chance. He listened to every idea, and each day Julia felt her confidence returning. The world outside her family's judgments, the pressure of the wedding faded away, and she was simply Julia, loved for her mind and her heart. She wondered if her mother even noticed how much it hurt. Her family's surprises had rarely been kind. Still, she tried to trust them, wishing that just once they might offer a gesture of real love. Listen, Julie, Mom and I have something special planned for the reception. Just don't ask questions, okay? You'll see. Sabrina sent a flurry of messages, each one tinged with rivalry and thinly veiled resentment. Did you see the venue options I sent? We should go bigger, Julie. The Carters will expect a show. The dress hung on the door, her shoes lined up neatly beside it, a bouquet of white roses resting on the vanity. Julia looked at her reflection and tried to see the woman Daniel saw capable, strong, worthy of love. Julia would reply politely, but the words always felt like a test she could never pass. It will be, I promise. And Julia, tomorrow, you'll finally see how much you matter, to me and to everyone else. Sabrina, I hope it's nothing that will embarrass anyone. Julia pressed a hand to her heart, letting herself believe, for just a moment, that everything might turn out better than she ever imagined. You're enough, Julia. For me, for this company, for everyone. Let them see who you are. Tomorrow her family's true intentions would be revealed, for better or worse. The rest will fall away. Her mother, Linda, grew even more insistent, calling Julia almost every evening. The request stung. Her sister only reached out when she needed something. Even so, Julia agreed, hoping to keep the fragile peace. In rare moments of quiet, Julia would stand at her living room window, gazing at the city lights and the engagement ring on her finger. She found herself snapping at small things: misplaced shoes, dishes left in the sink, little signs that her nerves were frayed. Daniel noticed, and one evening, as they ate takeout on the sofa, he reached out and brushed a lock of hair behind her ear. You don't have to carry all of this alone, you know? The memory of Daniel's proposal always made her heart flutter. So, have you picked out your dress yet? Or are you going to show up in one of your office suits? Julia forced a laugh. I went with something elegant and simple. It's what Daniel likes. Sabrina's tone soured. Well, I guess that's one way to make an impression. I hope you realize everyone will be comparing you to the Carter women. He had not cared for extravagance. He simply took her hand, looked her in the eye, and said, I want to build a life with you, not just a wedding. No one else had ever spoken to her like that, with pure honesty and warmth. One afternoon, while Julia reviewed a stack of wedding contracts at home, Sabrina called unexpectedly. Her voice was sugary but sharp. Julia bristled. A short silence stretched between them before Sabrina changed the subject, asking if Julia would help her with a work reference. Meanwhile, Julia found herself spending more and more time at Carter & Sons Furniture, helping Daniel's team refine new products and business plans. In the evenings, they would sit together in Daniel's office, surrounded by old family photographs and blueprints for the company's next chapter. Those moments were the only times she truly felt understood. One rainy Friday, as Julia was leaving the office, her phone vibrated. It was Sabrina, her voice rushed and excited. Julia's chest tightened. Oh, relax, Sabrina replied with a laugh. You're too sensitive. That night, Julia lay awake, replaying the conversation. As the wedding date approached, the tension in Julia's home grew thick. Julia's voice was small. I just want everything to be perfect. I want my family to be proud of me, not whatever they are now. Daniel smiled, squeezing her hand. On the eve of the wedding, Julia checked every last detail in the hotel room where she would get ready in the morning. Her phone rang, jolting her from her thoughts. It was Daniel, his voice warm and reassuring. Are you nervous? Julia's laugh trembled. A little. I just want tomorrow to be about us, not anyone else. Daniel paused before answering. His words lingered as she lay down, the city humming quietly outside her window. But as she drifted towards sleep, her sister's warning echoed in her mind. Spring arrived on the morning of Julia's wedding, bringing sunlight that danced through her hotel window and painted the walls gold. She sat quietly at the vanity as the hairstylist pinned back her dark hair, hands trembling only slightly. Julia tried not to let it get to her. She focused on the small joys, the dress she had chosen despite her family's protests, the simple pearl earrings her grandmother had given her, the gentle promise in Daniel's last message. I'll be waiting for you at the end of the aisle. The day she had anticipated for so long was finally here, but her heart was a mixture of excitement and dread. She found only impatience. "I am, Mom. Thank you for coming." Her phone buzzed with messages, congratulations from colleagues, good luck texts from friends in Chicago, but nothing from her mother or Sabrina. Linda finally entered, dressed in a shimmering silver gown, her face set in a careful mask. For a little while, Julia allowed herself to believe that everything would be okay. Sabrina was right behind, wearing an emerald green dress that drew every eye. "Now, we'd like to invite the bride's sister, Sabrina Warren, to share a few words." Julia floated through the celebration, radiant but fragile. Every so often she would catch Sabrina's gaze, unreadable and cold. Sabrina smiled, her confidence dazzling, her voice light as she began. "We're here today for my sister, Julia. Honestly, I never thought I'd see this day." They barely glanced at Julia as they checked their hair in the mirror. But she's always had her eyes on successful men too. Julia's face burned as Sabrina pressed on, describing her as the sister who always said she would marry a CEO. Linda's eyes widened. Daniel turned to the MC, nodding. "I'd like everyone to see who Julia truly is." "Well, she finally got her wish," Sabrina finished with a smirk. Julia's heart raced as the first images appeared, scenes from Carter and Sons Furniture's anniversary party, where she was seen laughing with employees and speaking about community projects. The footage shifted to clips from a business magazine interview, where Julia was described as the anonymous strategist who saved the company from ruin. "Let's be real, this wedding is just another smart investment for her." And he spoke clearly. "Without her, we wouldn't be here today. She saw the value in people and tradition. She fought for us when no one else would." Daniel's parents looked at Julia with pride. Others stared, stunned and speechless. Outside, guests were already arriving at the Carter family's historic estate, a sprawling home set amid blooming gardens in the Boston suburbs. The last slide read, "Julia's value to Carter and Sons, incalculable." Julia felt as if she'd been dropped into ice water, all her years of being misunderstood suddenly exposed to the world. "Is that what everyone thinks?" he asked quietly, his voice calm but powerful. He looked into her eyes with a deep tenderness that told her she was finally truly seen. For the first time, Julia understood that she could never go back to being invisible, not after this, not with Daniel by her side. In that moment, something inside her shifted forever. "You look nice, Julie." Julia's mother stood abruptly, raising her champagne glass. "To Julia, our family's gold digger. You finally made it, darling. Are you ready?" White tents and crystal chandeliers sparkled in the sunlight. As Julia stepped from the car, she paused for a deep breath, feeling the world tilt beneath her heels. She looked beautiful, but what she wanted more than anything was to feel seen. Inside the bridal suite, the atmosphere was oddly still. She tried to shut out the whispers she imagined in the crowd, guests who wondered if she was marrying for love or money, old friends who remembered her as the serious, awkward girl. But Daniel stood waiting for her at the altar, his gaze steady and full of love. In that moment, the rest of the world disappeared. Linda finally turned to her daughter, her tone brisk. Julia met her mother's eyes in the mirror, searching for any sign of warmth. Sabrina busied herself with her phone, barely offering a smile. The tension was thick as the wedding planner appeared to usher them out. The ceremony was about to begin. As Julia walked down the aisle, her arm hooked through her father's. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Vows were exchanged beneath a canopy of flowers, sunlight spilling through the trees, Daniel's hands warm as they held hers. The newlyweds led the way to the reception, surrounded by laughter, champagne, and the clinking of glasses. Midway through dinner, the MC took the microphone. The room grew quiet as Sabrina stood. Julia's heart beat painfully fast. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Julia tried to smile. Sabrina continued, "Julia's always been the responsible one, obsessed with work since college." A roar of laughter swept the room, some guests taking it as a joke, others exchanging uneasy glances. Julia's hands shook. She looked at Daniel, who wore a hardened expression, his jaw clenched as he glanced from Sabrina to Linda. The room was stunned for a moment, confusion flickering over the faces of friends and colleagues. Some guests awkwardly laughed, others looked away in discomfort. Tears stung her eyes, but Julia fought to stay composed. It was Daniel who broke the silence. He stood up slowly, his presence commanding attention. Sabrina's smile faltered. At his signal, the lights dimmed and a video began playing on the big screen at the back of the hall. Interviewers asked Daniel about the company's turnaround. The final images were a collage of photos showing Julia working late, meeting with employees, supporting families, and helping rebuild the business. When the video ended, the room was silent except for a few people quietly wiping tears from their cheeks. Julia stood frozen, trembling. She could feel Daniel's hand slide into hers, steady and warm. Her family's plan to humiliate her had been shattered in front of everyone. A hush lingered in the air after the video faded to black. Julia looked around the hall, seeing faces shining with tears, expressions of awe, and a few guests who now seemed ashamed of the laughter from moments before. For years, Julia had carried the pain of their dismissive words, always feeling like she had to prove herself, always chasing a love that seemed just out of reach. But in that moment, surrounded by people who now truly saw her, Julia realized she was no longer powerless. She could hardly breathe. Daniel's hand gripped hers firmly, as if telling her she was safe now, that nothing her family said could ever undo what he had shown everyone. Linda and Sabrina sat frozen, their plan crumbling before their eyes. That real value is measured in the lives we touch, not the money we save. She became not only our company's savior, but the love of my life. Tears spilled over, but for the first time, they were not from pain or humiliation. They were from a sense of being accepted, valued, finally seen for the woman she really was. Daniel turned to the crowd, his voice steady but laced with emotion. Julia changed everything for us, and for me. I want everyone here to know, this marriage has nothing to do with money or status. It's about respect. It's about love that grows from truly seeing another person's heart. I want you all to know something even Julia doesn't know. The first day she walked into Carter & Sons, our family business was about to shut its doors. I know I'm not the daughter or sister you expected. But I hope you can see now, this is who I am. All the old wounds felt as if they were beginning at last to heal. The applause that rose up around them was a warm embrace, filling the room with hope. And I hope, in time, you'll be proud of me too. She looked over at Linda and Sabrina, whose faces had softened. Something in their eyes, shame, maybe, but also regret hinted that even they couldn't ignore the truth any longer. Robert's voice trembled as he took both of Julia's hands. Thank you for saving our family. Thank you for believing in me, even when I couldn't believe in myself. You are so much more than just my son's bride. You are our family's protector. Daniel continued, many years ago, during a terrible recession, my grandfather nearly lost everything. Nothing has ever made us prouder than welcoming you into our lives, Julia. The room quieted again as Julia stood in the center of the dance floor, ringed by faces now full of hope and affection. For a long time, I thought the only way to be loved was to be perfect, to work harder, achieve more, never let anyone down. I lost myself in numbers and deadlines, trying to earn respect that always felt out of reach. But Daniel, and all of you, showed me that my value is not something I have to prove. It's something I already have, simply by being myself. He invested his own money to save his employees, even when it risked our family's future. One of those workers was Julia's grandfather. Because of my grandfather's choice, her family was able to survive, and her father went on to college. Julia never told anyone. She just wanted to pay that kindness forward in her own way. Everyone told us to cut staff, sell off what we could, and walk away from generations of work. Linda's hand went to her mouth, eyes wide with shock. Sabrina stared at the tablecloth, her cheeks burning, but Julia, she refused. She fought for our people. She brought hope back when we'd almost given up. He paused, swallowing hard as he glanced at Julia, his eyes full of gratitude. At first, I couldn't understand why she worked so hard for us. Why she never asked for more money, why she stayed late into the night and cared about every single employee. Then I learned the truth. The guests leaned in, breathless. A quiet murmur spread through the hall. Daniel's voice grew gentler. Julia taught me that the numbers only tell half the story. He looked around, eyes shining. I have never met anyone with such courage, compassion, and brilliance. The applause that followed was different this time, longer, warmer, full of genuine admiration. Julia felt a new lightness in her chest. Robert and Grace, Daniel's parents, crossed the room to her. Grace wrapped her in a gentle embrace. For a moment Julia was speechless, overwhelmed by the warmth of the Carter family, the kind of unconditional support she'd always wanted. Julia turned to Daniel, her voice trembling but strong. "Thank you, Daniel." She found her own voice at last, asking the MC for the microphone. Her voice shook at first but grew steadier with every word. She paused, looking at Linda and Sabrina. "I know we haven't always understood each other." A hush fell. Linda's eyes brimmed with tears. Sabrina looked down, unable to speak. Julia's own tears fell freely as Daniel took her hand, pulling her gently into his arms. For the first time in her life, Julia believed that love could be simple, unconditional, and true. The applause washed over Julia like sunlight, warming parts of her that had been cold for so long. She saw Linda standing at her table, lips trembling, uncertain whether to approach. Robert offered a proud nod, his eyes red at the edges. Julia clung to that sense of belonging, wanting to remember every second. "I was so focused on what I thought your life should look like that I never saw how much you were doing for others. I'm sorry. I really am. I hope you can forgive me. Sis, I don't even know what to say. I was jealous of you for so long. I wanted Mom's attention, but I could never catch up. I acted like your success wasn't real because I thought maybe then I wouldn't feel like I was failing." The reception picked up, but the energy in the room was transformed. People approached Julia, offering words of admiration and genuine kindness. Her colleagues from Chicago shook her hand and told her how much they'd learned from her. Daniel's friends welcomed her into their circle, their respect obvious. For once, Julia was celebrated not for her achievements, but for who she was. "I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." The first notes of their song drifted through the hall, and they swayed together under the soft lights. Julia rested her head against his chest, feeling his heartbeat steady and sure. Sabrina's shoulders hunched, her gaze locked on her hands as if she could hide inside them. She walked slowly, almost uncertainly, toward her daughter. Julia felt the air change. "You showed me what it means to be truly loved. Not for what I do, but for who I am." She opened her arms and Sabrina fell into them, shaking with silent sobs. "I love you, Julia. I always will, and I promise your story isn't finished. This is just the beginning." For the first time, she felt a lightness inside, a sense that maybe, just maybe, she was finally free from the old ache that had shaped her life. Her mother was laughing with Robert and Grace. Sabrina was chatting with Daniel's cousins, her usual bravado softened into something kinder. The three women stood together, the years of rivalry and pain melting away under the gaze of friends and family. She realized that, for the first time, she was standing at the center of her own life, not as a supporting player in someone else's story. She remembered the scared, lonely girl she used to be, always searching for a place to belong. Now, in this moment, she knew she had finally found it. Now, she knew it belonged to her too. But, as the woman she was always meant to be. The guests watched in quiet awe, some moved to tears themselves. Linda stopped in front of her, trembling. For a moment, neither spoke. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Julia felt the urge to reach for both of them, to finally break the cycle of silence and misunderstanding that had ruled their family for so many years. Before she could move, Daniel's parents stepped forward. Grace hugged Julia again, whispering, "Welcome home, sweetheart." For a moment, Linda clung to her like a lifeline, crying softly into Julia's shoulder. Just then, Linda's chair scraped back. Linda's voice broke as she said, "Julia, I was wrong." Tears streamed down Julia's face as she stepped forward, drawing her mother into an embrace. Sabrina appeared next, her steps hesitant and her face pale with regret. Julia didn't hesitate. Daniel placed a gentle hand on Julia's back and Julia turned to him, still clinging to her mother and sister. After a while, the music resumed. As the night wore on, Daniel pulled Julia onto the dance floor. "I never thought I could feel like this," she whispered. Daniel smiled, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "You deserve it all, Julia, every bit of it." She looked up at him, eyes shining. Daniel's arms tightened around her. All around them, Julia saw people smiling, laughing, and wiping away happy tears. Julia's heart soared. The night faded into a haze of music and laughter, the kind of joy Julia had always believed was reserved for other people. As Daniel led her outside to the garden, the air cool and fresh, Julia looked up at the stars. The days after the wedding felt almost unreal to Julia. Each morning she woke in Daniel's arms, sunlight streaming through their window in the Boston suburbs, the world outside still new and bright. She would watch him sleep for a moment, feeling a deep gratitude she had never known before. She wanted to believe that everything was healed, but some hurts left scars that took time to fade. She had started therapy after the wedding, facing the jealousy and insecurity that had shadowed her for so long. Julia felt a mix of sadness and hope for her sister, wanting to help her grow but knowing that Sabrina's journey was her own. Her mother Linda called her often now, no longer to criticize, but to ask about her day, to share recipes, to check in gently. "Hey, can I come over?" Sabrina's voice sounded hesitant, more vulnerable than Julia could ever remember. "I want you to know I really am sorry for how I acted. I used to think you were cold, but now I see." Julia felt the old ache soften, replaced by something lighter, a cautious hope that maybe, one day, they could truly be friends. He smiled, crossing to Julia and pressing a kiss to her forehead. "I like seeing you happy," he whispered. "You were just trying so hard to make everyone proud." Julia knew there would be setbacks, awkward conversations, even more tears. But she also knew she was not alone. She had Daniel, she had her new family, and she had a second chance with her own. "I was always the one needing attention, and I pushed you away because I was scared you'd outshine me." She let the cool air fill her lungs and thought about how much her life had changed. She remembered the girl she used to be, so desperate to prove herself, so afraid of never being enough. Now, surrounded by people who saw her, who valued her, she felt something she had only glimpsed before: peace. They talked about the future, their dreams for the company, the home they would build, the family they might someday have. Daniel's faith in Julia was unshakable, and it made her braver than she'd ever felt before. Each conversation was a step, however small, toward a relationship Julia had always wanted. That's what matters. Daniel had become her partner not just in life, but in hope, someone who stood by her, who lifted her up and showed her a future that was possible. Together, Julia and Daniel returned to work at Carter & Sons Furniture, but the atmosphere had changed. Julia was now greeted with warmth, her opinions sought after, her leadership respected. Employees who had once eyed her warily as an outsider now smiled and stopped her in the halls, eager to share ideas or simply say hello. Even Daniel's parents, Robert and Grace, took every chance to tell her how proud they were to have her as part of the family. It was the kind of belonging she had only dreamed about. Yet, Julia still felt the old wounds sometimes, especially when she thought about her own family. They sat together at the kitchen table, sunlight pouring in, sipping coffee and sharing awkward, genuine laughter. Sabrina, too, made an effort. She sent messages apologizing for old slights and sharing small victories from her own job. One chilly afternoon, Julia received a call from Sabrina. "Of course," Julia replied without hesitation. "You're always welcome." Sabrina arrived with a nervous smile and a box of pastries, an olive branch wrapped in a paper bag. After a while, Sabrina set her cup down, fingers twisting nervously. Julia reached across the table and took her sister's hand. "We both made mistakes, Sabrina. But we're here now." For the first time, there were no defenses between them, no competition or bitterness, just two sisters starting over. That evening, Daniel came home and found the two women still talking, Sabrina's laughter ringing through the house. Later, after Sabrina left, Julia and Daniel sat on the sofa, her head resting on his shoulder. One night, Julia stood alone on their garden terrace, the moon high above, the city lights shimmering in the distance. But the journey wasn't over. The real work, the building of trust, the healing of old hurts, the creation of something lasting was just beginning. As she watched the stars flicker over Boston, Julia let herself believe in a future where love, acceptance, and forgiveness could finally outweigh the pain of the past. A year passed, and with it the seasons turned gently over the life Julia and Daniel had built together. Spring sunlight streamed through the kitchen window of their Boston suburb home as Julia poured 2 cups of coffee, savoring the simple comfort of a new morning. You ready?
He asked, his smile still as warm as the day they met. Julia nodded, her heart light.
Today's announcement feels different. They'd launched a program called Carter Scholars, offering business education and hands-on training to young people who'd never had such opportunities before. It had become their greatest shared pride, a way to pay forward the kindness Julia's family had received generations ago. I think it's the first time I feel truly proud, not just of the company, but of us. In the garden beyond the glass, flowers bloomed, and the grass shone with dew. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. There was no trace of the old rivalry or judgment in her voice, only love, fragile but real. The world outside seemed to mirror the changes within her. Daniel's parents arrived, carrying stories and smiles. Young scholarship recipients mingled with family and friends in the sunlit garden. It was a gathering that radiated warmth, a patchwork family, built not on old resentments, but on acceptance and kindness. It was her mother, Linda, letting her know she'd be arriving soon for their monthly family dinner. They spoke about legacy and hope, about the courage to break old patterns and believe in new beginnings. The applause that followed felt honest and full, the kind of support Julia had always yearned for. She had learned that family could mean many things: a company rebuilt, a sister found again, a mother's heart finally opened. And this time, she would never let it go. She had learned that real belonging comes not from chasing approval, but from daring to live honestly and love deeply. She'd changed in the past year, finding her own passions and helping with the scholarship program. Daniel slipped his arm around her, and they stood in easy silence, surrounded by the hum of gentle voices and the scent of blooming flowers. There was a gentleness to her now, an openness Julia had never seen before. As they prepared the table together, Sabrina paused, looking at Julia with eyes full of sincerity. Her mother's respect was real, Sabrina's affection was genuine. Daniel's love was unshakable. Julia realized she was now at the center of her own family, a family built on trust and understanding, not just blood. "Happiness," she answered quietly. "The happiness of finally being myself. Of being seen and loved, not for what I achieve, but for who I am. I'm grateful for you, Julia, not just for forgiving me, but for believing we could start over. I needed that." After the wedding, Linda had kept her distance out of embarrassment, but an illness in the fall changed everything. When Julia dropped everything to care for her, something inside Linda finally shifted. Old walls crumbled, replaced by a quiet gratitude and a growing respect. Now, family dinners had become a cherished ritual, moments to talk, to laugh, to heal. Julia glanced over at Daniel as he joined her at the table, already dressed for work. Together they had transformed Carter and Sons Furniture into more than just a business. As she finished her coffee, Julia heard her phone buzz. Sabrina came early that afternoon, carrying a homemade cake and a wide, hopeful smile. Julia squeezed her hand, feeling the simple, quiet joy of being sisters in truth, not just in name. When Linda arrived with her signature apple pie, she hugged Julia tightly. In the afternoon, the house filled with laughter. Later, Julia and Daniel stood at the center of the garden, announcing the first recipients of the Carter Scholars Awards. As dusk settled, Julia found a moment to stand quietly on the terrace, watching the last rays of sunlight paint the sky in gold and lavender. "What are you thinking?" Daniel asked, pressing his lips softly to her hair. Julia let the moment fill her, heart full in a way she'd never known before. All around her, people who had once doubted her had become allies, even friends. Looking back on the long road that brought her here, Julia knew the journey had been worth every step. As the stars appeared, Julia smiled and leaned into Daniel's embrace, knowing that after years of searching, she had finally found her place in the world.